Tom's, James, Michael, and Dat. I think that's 3 of your team members joining us today. So we just have the first talk with Jeremy from Alice and Bob. So for our second session of the day, we have James from Quantropi, CEO from Quantropi, and Michael Redding, CTO from Quantropi, and their advisor, investor, Nguyễn. So I think we will be over time, so I will just immediately pass on the microphone to your team.
No problem. All right, great. Thank you, Rossi. And so I'll do a quick introduction of the folks on the call from my side. Mr. Michael Redding is our Chief Technology Officer. He comes from 30 years at Accenture, and he's led equity investments across the world, also in quantum computing, cybersecurity, machine learning, AI. He's also done a lot of academic partnerships, setting up labs across the world. And then I think the most craziest decision he did was move from nice California, Napa, California, all the way to the freezing cold Canada, capital of Canada, one of the most coldest cities in the world, to help us launch a product that has come from amazing science that he'll talk about in a bit. Mr. Nguyễn is an investor, an advisor. He was actually leading the E&Y partner program as a partner for the cybersecurity in Vietnam, actually, and Asian countries. He was also the head of Vietnam for Grab, also the head of Vietnam for Accenture. So kind of ex-colleagues there. And of course, I think another crazy thing he did was jump on and invest into Quantropi, and has helped us really in the Vietnam market and really setting up partnerships across the world as well. So myself, I don't have that great of a background, but I like to say that I'm a fintech enthusiast. I come from banking and finance. I've also jumped into new material science in graphene. I've helped commercialize a lot of very hard to understand technologies, as well as bring it to kind of global markets through my roles at the Canada ASEAN Business Council, Hong Kong Canada Business Council, organizations like that. I'm currently also as part of Quantropi on Quantum Industry Canada's corporate member, where we're also working with many European countries. And welcome to talk with Alice and Bob as well, because we're looking for partnerships country to country wise from Canada and Europe. Always been great friends. So without further ado, I will jump into the presentation and tell you a bit about Quantropi. Quantropi is a company that does work in quantum technologies, but not on the sensor side, not on the hardware side, but on the communication side. We focus on quantum cryptography and protecting the world of information today, tomorrow, and forever. So talk a bit about why we exist. I talked a bit about Michael, Dad, myself, but the real key guy is, and the guy that you guys really want to know about, is our co-founder, chief scientist, Dr. Randy Kwong. Dr. Randy Kwong holds the first patent to two-factor authentication. He spent 25 years at Nortel working on networks, and he's also comes from a background in quantum physics, has a PhD in quantum physics. So this guy is really kind of like a 1 in 100 million, I like to say. And how I met him is I was leading an investment into cybersecurity, into identity authentication. And when someone tells me some guy invented two-factor authentication, he's got to be a smart guy. So after investing into his previous company, he said to me, James, you know what? I got something that is unbelievable. And he started talking to me, and then he sucked me in. And then, of course, now we became co-founders, founded company. But why? Because I come from the bank where if there's no trust, there's no bank. If there's no privacy, there's no trust. And so when Randy told me that, hey, you can have trust, you can have privacy, but not only that, you can have absolute high performing solutions in the market for our digital economy. That's what really attracted me. So we came together to preserve trust and truth, and definitely for the world. So to tell you a bit about why that's important is because the world today operates on this thing called the internet that relies on two pillars, trust and truth. This internet is growing massively every day because of the amount of millions of users and devices getting connected to it every day. You have drones, you have sensors, you have this information is coming from every angle, right? And the amount of data that's being stored is growing massively. So of course, when the treasure chest is getting bigger and bigger, people want to get at it. So cybercrime is growing rampant. It's going nuts. It's going crazy. You hear one every day or more than one every day. That's getting bigger and bigger, hitting the trillions of dollars every year. Now, on top of that, you have companies that are really, really stressing. Why? Because they're failing privacy along with the governments. So talk about you guys in Europe, GDPR. You guys are fining companies $1.3 billion year to date for GDPR fines. That's going to grow more if we don't do something about it. And of course, top of all of that, you guys here are all quantum experts. You guys are kind of part of the problem. You guys are working so hard to accelerate quantum computing, and that same power that's going to solve all the great problems you guys are trying to solve is also going to break today's encryption that protects the internet. And so, talking about the computer landscape, we always know about the big logos that you see here and Rigetti, and all that IonQ. So there's really kind of like two types of quantum computing, type of quantum computing technology when it comes to hardware. The logic computers are solving kind of the general problems, but then you have the annealers that are focusing on solving kind of the financial optimization. And we see D-Wave doing that. But we see D-Wave say, hey, you know what? We've done that. Now we want to do the other side of things. So what this is, what we've seen in the market when it comes to the landscape is that the advancement is happening fast. Like in 2019, Google, announced quantum supremacy, or now they're calling it quantum advantage. With their 44 or 42 qubit, 49 qubit computer. Fast forward about a year, IBM's like triple that. Hey, Google, eat dust, right? So then Honeywell is jumping on this and that. Everybody's going nuts, right? And then you have Alice and Bob and everyone. But I have to tell you that this is all great. We need this, but now because we have to get out there and try to do more to able to solve the important problems like finding cures to diseases. Yeah, that. So now we have, like this massive problem, and it's not going to disappear. The quantum threat is imminent because you guys are doing such a great job. And so Quantropi says, what to the market is, we realize that if we're going to have some type of kind of upgrade to today's security and privacy infrastructure, we can't just do it one step at a time or one kick at the can. We have to look at it as a holistic approach. We have to do it all at once because that's what companies are asking. That's what the market is telling us. And we believe a platform must be true. It must have trust. You need to know who you're working with, who you're dealing with. Because if there's no trust, right, you're not going to have a connection point. 2, you need to protect your data forever, not just today. And you need to leverage uncertainty by pushing it all to the attacker. We need definitely entropy. We use it today, we're going to need it tomorrow. Why? Because we just need entropy or to create strong keys for stronger passwords. And with that, I'd like to kind of talk to you about is how does Quantropi really use true? How do we start with true, and how do we build a true cryptographic platform with our core technologies? So I'd like to pass over to Michael.
Great, thank you, James. So we're going to go quick and kind of paint a story, and would definitely encourage you to go to the Quantropi website. You can read the white papers and the academic peer-reviewed papers that cover a lot of what we're going to talk about. But in kind of all in one page, this is kind of the executive summary or the introduction to Quantropi's intellectual property. And what's important is if we are going to fight the quantum threat, we have to fight it with quantum technology. And in particular at Quantropi, we focus on quantum information theory. Not necessarily, some people in the marketplace are trying to use like photonic entanglement as one form of security. Others are just trying to use classic algorithms and classic math approaches, but both have issues and are weak relative to the power of the emerging quantum technology. And so for us, we start in the center with quantum logic gates, as James already mentioned. And as you guys hopefully very much have seen, especially even like the last conversation with Alice and Bob, there are both non-classical behaviors within quantum and within qubits, but there's also classical behavior gates. And we really leverage the latter for their security properties. And in particular, we represent the Hilbert space, which was just in the last Alice and Bob conversation. Since that is a quantum space, we can represent that as a symmetric mathematical group, and from there derive a set of permutation matrices. And once we have that set of matrices, which we can now express mathematically in linear algebra, we are able to then, once you have linear algebra, we can then express it as computer code that can run on tomorrow's quantum computer natively, but can also run on today's legacy networks and compute CPUs and GPUs. And that's really important because, as James said, we want to protect networks and data today all the way through tomorrow. And you can see some of the attributes that we get from these permutation matrices, and from there we can derive both symmetric encryption and those strong random numbers. And I'll explain a little more about that in a moment. But once we're also working in vector space, we can also, a variant of that is polynomial space, which gives us classical behaviors from which we can go the other way and derive a system of multivariate polynomials, and as a result can achieve what we need to do from an asymmetric encryption perspective. And so just working from that same quantum center, working from the same vector space, both quantum and classically, we are able to derive a complete expression of asymmetric and symmetric encryption, that complete holistic platform that James talked about, all written in linear algebra. So a mathematical basis for very powerful security properties. And so talking about specifically what we need to do, I'll take a quick fly through. With asymmetric encryption, the ideal quantities is, number one, that I can exchange a secret, typically the key you use for a login or to establish a session, and I can verify through digital signature that in fact I sent this data or I did this transaction on a blockchain. And what's important is that it can never be broken, that you cannot get either the private key by breaking the public key, or you can never extract the ciphertext, what you've protected with that public key. And what's interesting, James had an earlier slide, Shor's algorithm, which was developed back in the 1990s, so it's almost 30 years old, said that when we had sufficient quantum computing, current public-private key pairs could be broken very fast. And we are only 1 to 3 years away from that actually occurring, which is why there's this imperative for Quantropi. So as I mentioned, the market is already trying to solve this problem. One way is with, again, quantum entanglement of photons at the single photon layer. The challenge is it's very slow, it's very limited distance, it's very exotic hardware. If you think about today's internet that spans the entire planet, current experimental distances are 20 to 80 kilometers, above 100 kilometers. It doesn't even work, so that wouldn't even traverse a major metropolitan area. Also very low key rates. You think about 5G, you think about fiber optic networks of today, yet we're only seeing 2 kbit key rates, so not nearly fast enough. And oh, by the way, it's very fragile. It's very easy for the states to collapse. And so in fact, the NSA in the US has said, do not use it for actual security deployments. It's just not ready. We're probably a decade or more away. And then the alternative is to use classical mathematics, which I mentioned earlier, and this is where NIST has focused. But the challenge is, again, you're working in different power spectrums mathematically, and the realization is that they're just coming up with more and more complicated math problems, which on the one hand may be hard to solve, so they'll slow down the quantum attacks, but they're hard to implement and they're slow. And again, when you have a connected car where it's traveling at 100 kilometers an hour, so it only has 30 milliseconds to make a decision before an accident happens, slow is not your friend. And so with Quantropi, as I mentioned, we actually use from the vector space, in polynomial space, we actually derive a system of polynomials, and we're not gonna double click through this today, but again, the papers are on our website. But because we actually create a system of equations that even a second-year student in university can solve, but an attacker cannot because of the noise variables. The net result is something that's very computationally efficient, but cryptographically strong. And I want to highlight the fact that you see those key sizes. That becomes important because actually when we compare the Quantropi mask, which is our brand name, there you go, to the 4 finalists that NIST is looking at for security level 5, which is the equivalent of AES 256, is their highest security level. You can see the radical difference, the radical advantage that our mathematical approach has in the key size, which means both how fast it gets processed, go back to that connected car story, but also the devices it can go on, because the keys can only be run on a PC or a cloud server and not on your mobile device or your security camera or your IoT or your connected car. Well, then we leave a huge hole in this interconnected world that we live in. And so we really see this massive advantage that math and vector space gives the Quantropi solution. So then moving on to symmetric encryption, the second leg of the stool. And this is really, again, shows the power of this paradigm shift from today's classic computing Boolean algebra to linear algebra and the representation of quantum states. Because, and we just saw that Alice and Bob talking about the CNOT gates. Well, we can represent that as a permutation group, which we from therefore can derive a lot of power. And you can see the computational advantage of linear algebra and quantum and matrix math, which is the square versus just a single linear array. And in fact, to really bring it to life, we always tell this little story. The difference between our approach and classic compute is in Boolean algebra, you always have power of 2 to the n. So if I have 8 bits, 2 to the 8th is 256. So if that's a combination lock protected by 8 bits, I only have to try 256 numbers before I open the lock. Alternatively, with this permutation group, we can expand it out to 10 to the 507th permutations. So instead of 256 combinations, I have 10 to the 507th. That will take a while to run through all these combinations. In fact, there's not enough time left in the universe, and that's only with a simple 8-bit implementation. Think about if we go to, instead of 256 factorial, we go to one more bit or go to 256 bits. The numbers become astronomically large in terms of the theoretical space, and the entropy, you can see, same 8 bits, a massive entropy expansion. And at the same time, because it's expressed in linear algebra, it is very, very efficient to code. And here you can see that our implementation of these permutation matrices actually runs 18 times faster than the current gold standard, which is AES 256. So I get the strength of improved quantum security while actually getting better application and network performance. Win-win. Who wouldn't like that? And here's a fun picture, taking that picture of our founders and CEO, James, with our co-founder, Dr. Randy Kwong. We run it through that encryption matrix, and you can see a perfectly noisy picture, which means that it is cryptographically sound. And again, we think it would take to the end of the universe for you to be able to crack that picture and get back the smiling faces of Randy and James as they show off one of our patents. So last but not least, we talk about quantum strong random numbers, right? It's one thing to have a great lock, but you got to have a great key. And there's 2 forms. There's random numbers from physical sources, and historically these have been measuring physical states that create noise, whether it's heat dissipation, atmospheric noise, lava lamps. There's a famous experiment where physical phenomena that have a random noise factor get measured. You then encode that phenomena as a numerical stream, and there you get your random numbers. And we've seen an upgrade the last few years to quantum sources of noise, and these are called quantum random number generators. And in fact, from Quantropi, we source true strong random numbers from Quintessence Labs. They build a PC board, $5,000. You can put it into your server, and you now have a source of noise coming from a physical quantum source. And so that's really powerful, but also really expensive. And so the alternative to a physical source is, of course, pseudo-random numbers. It's available in every software, every operating system. But the challenge with pseudo-random number generators is what's called entropy exhaustion. They have short periodicity, and the result is it's not perfectly random. There are biases, and with enough computing power, you can calculate that bias and break the random number, and that's bad. We've started to see now and the emergence of pseudo quantum random numbers, which is one of the things that Quantropi is doing, and we'll talk about that in the next slide, where we overcome those limitations. And in fact, we're using our same permutation matrix approach. We take 64 of those 8-bit matrices, and that gives us over 100 kbits of total entropy. And to give you a comparison, if you're running Linux, right, and on your server or on your desktop, the random number function on it only has 64 bits. Like your Mac has only, or your PC only has 64 bits of entropy, and just a regular classical supercomputer can break that random number string in 37 seconds, and some of the quantum computers you're learning about could break it in as little as a microsecond. Whereas take the 8-bit matrices that we do here at Quantropi and run it on the same computers, and it would take 10 to the 500th years for a classical computer to break it, or 10 to the 239th years for a quantum computer of the same size. So clearly a much more robust random number. And because of that, we now can distribute it over today's internet. This is a recent experiment we did here in Canada, working with Canary Research Network, where we showed we could stream these quantum random numbers over thousands and thousands of kilometers, everything from almost 3,500 kilometers here in Canada to almost 15,000 kilometers on the other side of the world to Singapore. And the way we try to make this, for the average business person to understand, we talk about the fact that Google needs 64,000 32-byte AES-256 keys every second, because they handle 64,000 sessions per second. And so just with our test network, we could support as many as 6 Googles here in Canada, as almost a full Google operating all the way, trans-Pacifically to Singapore. And the reason that's powerful, again, looking at some of the physical approaches like QKD, they can't even do what we can do over 15,000 kilometers at less than 20 kilometers. And so shows the power of math sometimes over the positive power of physical world. And so just to bring this all to life, we're going to walk you through a few use cases before I turn it back over to James, but just again to show you how would I apply this in the real world. And so we've talked about the 3 elements: trust, uncertainty, and entropy. We've talked about our mathematical basis from which we derive the 3 pillars of asymmetric, symmetric, and strong random. We've given the names, if you've been watching closely, we called asymmetric mask, symmetric keep, and strong random secure. We bundle that all up into a online SaaS platform called Keyspace, which we can then make available commercially over the internet to any developer anywhere. And from there, here are some of the use cases. So for example, a very classic approach to streaming security for, like this video conference here we're on right now, which is where you start with an AES-256 shared key, but then you inject what's called an initialization vector, or IV, in order to randomize each packet. And so if you have strong random numbers as that IV, you can actually make that AES key work longer. There's this idea called entropy exhaustion that, according to NIST, one 32-byte key can only encrypt by itself about 1 terabit of data. And again, on fiber optics, that's not many seconds of time, but with IV, you can do packet level security as long as you have enough of it. And so here's a case that we did in conjunction with Huawei Research Canada, where we showed we could inject IV fast enough that they could secure at the packet level 5G networks, either from your cell phone to the base station or from the base station over the fiber optic network. And that means you need 32 megabits per second of random numbers on your phone and 32 gigabits per second at the base station. And we demonstrated that we could generate quantum secure numbers at those speeds so that you can truly have the next generation of networks protected at a packet level, which is the strongest security possible. Another big idea in the marketplace is this idea of bring your own keys. in the industry, everyone's rushing to cloud computing, running things on Azure, on Amazon, on Google Cloud. But the challenge is that's giving control to those companies. And in fact, if you're a follower of US politics, and hopefully you're mostly not, but if you follow US politics, in the last presidential administration, the president subpoenaed Apple for emails of reporters and the opposition, and said, and because Apple had the passwords, they could give them the emails and the passwords, and the president could sit there and read other people's emails. Not the best idea. Whereas when you have a strong cryptographic key that you control, well then, even if Apple gives someone else your email, they can't read it. And so therefore, this becomes a very powerful idea, but only if you can get those passwords to where you need them over today's networks. And a very important high security use case is the idea of that, since wires and fiber optics on the ground can be physically attacked, why not distribute keys and data through satellites? Much harder to attack because of the physics and the complexity of operating through space. And so this is a very popular use case, but the challenge again is today, like the Chinese government launched a quantum satellite, but its effective bit rate is 1. That's 1 bit per second. Kind of hard to do a Zoom call at 1 bit per second. And so again, Quantropi with our solution, because we're doing it in a very efficient way, we can distribute data and keys over the satellite network to where you need it on an airplane, in any city, any home, any mobile device, anywhere on the planet with that full security. And then going a little further, the challenge is that if you were close paying attention to James's slide, Grover's algorithm is expected to weaken AES 256, won't break it, but it'll make it such that, well, again, when there's enough quantum power, you'll be able to guess the keys. And so another approach, because our keep space keep is 18 times faster, you could, of course, eliminate AES and just use keep and get stronger encryption and faster throughput. But there are governments and banks that are regulated, and the current regulations require them to use AES. So we have this concept of the double wrap, where I can take your plain text, whatever secrets you want to protect, wrap it in a quantum shell, give it an outer envelope, which is AES 256, so it meets the regulatory requirements. And now you have what the cryptographers call defense in depth, because even if someone somehow has a super quantum computer and they break the AES outer envelope, that inner hard shell of quantum protects it for 10 to 500 years. And that is a long time. And so last but not least,
that again, the quantum what?
Sorry?
Like you wrap the code around your thing, and then what is the name? I just missed it.
Sorry, try one more time with the audio. Just ask. So I can say, and so you take the plain text, the data you want to protect, you use our keep algorithm to wrap a quantum shell, right? A quantum envelope, like that picture of James and Randy, where it's completely randomized and completely encrypted, and then you re-encrypt it with AES 256 around the outside, so that it meets the NIST and the regulatory standard of having AES as the primary envelope. But then if that ever gets broken, you still have that inner envelope, right? It's like double wrapping a present. Wrap it in wrapping paper, put it in a box, put it in the mail.
Yes.
Someone opens the box, the present is still wrapped up. Make sense?
Yeah. I got it. I just didn't get the name. Can you say the name again?
Just call it double encryption.
Okay.
Yeah, double encryption or
Thanks.
double wrap. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So last but not least, and we mentioned, 1 foot in today, 1 foot in tomorrow. Again, because we're working in quantum information theory and we're working in the Hilbert space, the net result is that we can run our math both on today's classic computers, but also natively on the gates themselves, on the quantum computer itself. And that's going to open up an ability to have end-to-end classic to quantum encryption. So just like Zoom promises endpoint to endpoint, end-to-end encryptions, as does WhatsApp, well, now when you're doing your drug discovery or your financial optimization or your nuclear bomb tests or whatever you're using that quantum computer to do, no doubt it's something very important to the corporation or the government that they would like to keep protected from others. Well, now it's never in the clear. It is never unencrypted from where it starts on the quantum computer till it gets back home to wherever they sit in the world. And we think that that's going to be a major enhancement. to the actual scale up and commercial use of quantum computing, which drives demand, which drives research investments. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to James to kind of wrap it up, and then we can answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. That was great. So I've been asked to come to this session to really talk about the business applications and how do we go from the lab into full commercialization mode. That has to really come with the product market fit, product development life cycle, but really understand the problem and solution, right? So we built our solution really focusing on where the core problems lie, right? And some of the biggest problems are, like we mentioned already, the quantum threat. Also, the thing is, there's something called steal now, crack later, right? And if we're protecting data, right, we need to protect it forever. And the thing is, people are going to be harvesting data and need to decrypt it later. We have to protect data from everywhere to anywhere, right? So at rest, in motion, and we need to preserve the mode of operations for businesses. We can't just pull everything out and replace it. It's just impossible. It's way too costly. So QKD is one of the reasons people have a lot of challenges with it. But then we need also high performing solutions, right? So that's where the kind of the small digital signature size, the latency, all that stuff, is really important for anybody to use or listen to you about your solution. So that's why we, kind of went back to the drawing board many, many times. We didn't get where we are today just by snapping our fingers, right? We are like you guys. We're in the lab, we did that, but we did that many, many years early on, even before Quantropi was started with Randy, right? But when Randy founded me, he had to have some type of prototype or concept, or at least, paper publication or patent to say, hey, I got this concept pretty clear, right? So the concept is clear now. Now, how do I get it into a prototype or MVP so that I can go out there and test my hypothesis, right? And hypothesis is not only about your technology, but about the problem you're solving. Is it important enough? Are people willing to spend money to further advance your cause? And that's what we've done, right, to get to where we are. And Quantropi solution is really built around that. And we basically covered everything, from our 3 core products under the Keyspace platform. So our platform allows you to scale, right? And we really kind of mirrored the Microsoft Office 365 model with Keyspace. So then at the, you have Word, PowerPoint, Excel. You can start with, each and every one of these. Like you can start with Word, right, or Excel or PowerPoint, and then add more as you go. And it's a subscription-based model. So, we charge an annual platform fee, but it just, we also have a consumption model based on endpoints. So this here is Randy came up with groundbreaking IP, but how we're communicating to the market, how we're building a solution, and how we're commercializing is not anything new. But we're trying to learn from the folks that made it happen and work, like the Microsoft, the IBMs of the world. And partnerships are important. What you guys are doing is important. This is how you get, greater minds around the table, and I'm happy to talk more about, our story. And, but the thing is, the best way to really find if what you have makes sense or help you advance your cause, get out there, talk to people like you're doing now, build partnerships, and we're more than happy to be doing that with you. And of course, we're doing that with many other university affiliations, organizations. We are definitely say, hey, you know what, there's some big threat that's coming. Don't worry about it. We got you. Bring it on. Our contact information is there. And I really want to thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the great organizers that put this together, and also all the other speakers. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Jim and Michael and Dad for the very inspiring talk. Is there any question from the audience and the students?
Yeah, well, there's probably people who are thinking about some questions. Actually, a couple of nights ago, I was presenting across Vietnam for the Tech Fest, and so definitely, I know you guys are academic, but also look at the business side. So jumping into something like Tech Fest, listening to all these other AI, blockchain, this and that tech companies that are commercializing, learning from them, right? Because you need to narrow the gap from industry and academia together at the same time, right? You can't just do one or the other, right? And the thing is, the research has to be led by industry problems, because that's where you're really going to get somewhere far, right? So if you have something in your head, really go out there and test it. So if there's anything in your head right now you want to test with our commercial folks here on the call, welcome you.
Okay, maybe let me just break the ice. So I have a question about the technology, like how much computing power does a quantum computer need to break the current ISA? And what would be then for the cube for your technology?
So I'll take a stab at that. And so right now the estimate is that to break RSA, the current public key encryption, that a quantum computer with about 1,000 effective qubits should be sufficient to start to break, especially some of the older key sizes. So that's one of the responses of the industry is to longer keys, therefore harder to break. Problem with that is longer keys, slower to run. So kind of it's got a negative consequence. So, if you saw the IBM Eagle announcement last week, they announced about 127 effective qubits. So about 10% of the way to the assumed number. But there's everything, it's not going to be, it's going to take 10 times as long to get 10 more, right? We've seen doubling every few years. So it's not going to take many years to double to get to that theoretical 1,000 plus qubits. And then if you look at something like a D-Wave, where they're claiming over 10,000 qubits, but they're sparsely connected. So it's more like 40 to 50 effective, fully connected qubits, but they're growing again rapidly. So that's why the estimate is that the time frame for this to occur is 3 to 5 years before we get to one that can effectively do it. And it'll probably be a government agency that we don't know about that'll have it first. But then the second part of your question, how long until they have enough qubits to break the Quantropi, like for example, public key? So our mass product, the answer is never, which is a bold statement, but we have the mathematical proofs because we've basically created an underdetermined system of equations such that there are theorems going back 200 plus years that say in an underdetermined mathematical equation, our system of equations cannot be solved. So we have created an unsolvable problem. So it doesn't matter how much power you have, it's unsolvable mathematically. And if you can, good news, you will get a Nobel Prize in math. So I encourage everyone on this call to try to break us because you will get a Nobel Prize and I will gladly go to that ceremony.
Well, definitely both statement, but I think you have a base in the source for that, right? And I think this field of quantum safe cryptography is so interesting, but it's also based on everything we're doing right now, right? We're moving digitalized, transforming companies, meaning that we're letting our data on the internet, and we make sure we need to secure it. And actually, I have myself questions actually. So one thing that Jane just mentioned that a good formula for a successful entrepreneur startup is having a concrete research and also meeting the market demand. How does that in your experience of working in that center, Michael, to see that that perfect match happened? Do you see that happening a lot, or do you see that it need to be coming from a university or coming from the market itself?
Well, I'll take a stab at that, and since James has done a lot of this as well, I'd love for him to answer it as well. I think in the end, and we've even seen that as we've talked to a number of the investors that James has recruited in the past to invest in Quantropi, and those that we're talking to now as we raise new funds. The savvy investors, the most successful VCs, are looking for that IP where you've got true IP and not just yet another clever business model. Because if it's just a business model, others can quickly copy the behavior and therefore potentially out hustle you. Whereas if you have true science or true innovation, an IP at the heart of it, then that's something that is unique and exploitable. But then secondarily, it's not just one thing to have a brilliant idea, to have a better mousetrap, as we say, but also to match it to a need, whether it's cost or growth, whether it's security or commerce. But it's finding something where someone, because your change is hard, right? And especially for large governments or large corporations, they tend to resist change because it's working, why mess with it? And so to get them to take the risk, to get the reward, you've got to tie it to an imperative. So maybe James comments, you've done a lot of this, maybe comment a little bit more on what you've seen.
Yeah, so you know, I won't talk too much on the later stage type company. I'll talk more on the earlier stage because we're trying to talk about from kind of concept to MVP, right? And from MVP to, let's say, Series A. So when you're looking at that, it's, you know, people are going to say, hey, I got this great new idea and I have this great new invention. The guy's like, okay, well, he listened to it, you know, a lot more, most of the time they're hard to understand, right? Because if it's good, it's probably new, right? And if this valuable IP, it's probably new. So most people won't grasp it. So you have to get your messaging really clear, right? And using good analogies, presentation, and communication skills. So there's actually a lot of soft skills required at the beginning. So now let's say, okay, you know what? The main thing is that, you know, you have, right, Mike talks about IP, right? That may take a long time to understand, but you can't wait for the world or the market or who you're talking to understand. You need money today, or you need people to work for you today. You need people to help you today. So that's when they look at other things. Okay, they look at your background. What's your education? Hey, you're talking about quantum information theory. Do you have anything in your education that supports that, or your work experience, right? So your actual credentials are very important, and then the credentials of the surrounding team members, maybe your co-founders or your advisors or your other investors. That's very important. Then the third thing is like traction, right? So getting early on traction, and the traction could be even a testimonial, right? It could be an email from somebody that has credibility. Right. So the beginning, two key things is getting yourself visible and making sure you're credible. Right. So if you can get those two things, right, you will get more and more traction that will help you support financing activities, hiring activities, you know. And again, the worst thing you can do for yourself is lock yourself in the lab, right, and tell yourself, I'm good, I have the best thing, get the best, you know. And then, you know, you have to go out there, right? You know, I've gone out there so many times, right, and I've got shut down numerous times, right? And this is a thing where Elon Musk says something, and I truly get it when he says, if someone tells you, you know, if he says, should you do a startup? His answer is, you know, don't do it. It's because if you're going to do a startup, or if you're going to bring your idea into market, it has to be very meaningful enough so that you're willing to do a lot of sacrifice. And when I say sacrifice, it's not only money, it's your health, it's your family time, it's your other opportunity costs, tons of things. So these are things that you need to consider as a basically entrepreneur moving from a researcher, right? So, and I think is what Randy did really important. So Randy actually had a previous startup, you know, and I wouldn't say it was very successful. I think it was more successful with many, but the thing is, he learned from that one is that, hey, I was technical guy, quantum physicist, and my other co-founder was also technical. You know what happens when you have two technical co-founders? Both guys think they're the smartest guys in the world. They always fight, right? So so he said, you know, I need to find a guy that complements my skill sets, the other side of the equation, right? So I'm on this side of the equation, I'm the top. I need to find a guy on the other side of the equation, the business, capital markets, you know, sales, right? So then when we go to the table and we disagree, if it's technical, I'm not going to argue with Randy because I know he's going to say stuff that I don't even understand. Right. And if it comes to, hey, about money, right, or sales, he's not going to argue with me because I've raised a lot of money. I sold a lot of things. So this is where that partnership is important and that synergy is important. So finding a co-founder and the right partner and the right one is not easy. It's probably the hardest thing you're going to do, but it's going to be the biggest sign of your success. You can find the right one.
Great.
And of course, once you have that, then you need to find a Michael Redding, and then you need to find a that because, you know, I got the business vision, Randy brought the technology vision, right? You know, but, you know, like when we try to build a prototype car, you know, the wheels are falling off. You know, we got the idea, it looks nice, but, you know, it wasn't working well, right? So then Michael brings with the product strategy, building the product team, you know, and that really what made our company go from this, like really accelerating greatly because, you know, you bring in a great talent like Michael that really builds that strategy for the product. And that's the thing. Product is what you're commercializing, right? So that there's a big jump. Then we're no longer a kind of like a research company, right? We're now selling product because we have a product we can be proud of. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, maybe I think this is a good link to maybe your investor and advisor, Mr. Dat, because he's also in the room.
Thanks,
Hi.
Rossi. Thanks.
Yeah.
I really echo what Michael and James talk about the products. And for me, the experience going from the world of Accenture and IBM to startup is quite a transition. So now I'm involved in about 4 startups myself, both investor and as advisor. And it's really tough to transition from the role of a CEO or the partner leading a practice to advisor role. But that's also the interesting part, because you are actually putting the money where you believe, and you actually can be have the privilege of witnessing the company going from stage to stage to stage. And for me, I really enjoyed seeing the maturity of the founders or the leadership team going from different stages of the company and going to commercial. And that, for me, if I can influence or I can impact a little bit of my experience and my skill, that for me is a reward in itself already. Not the money. The money can come later part. Maybe it will come, maybe it will not come, right? But if you can involve in some way to grow the company, I feel like I can live again, right? I can relive my youth or the passion. So I can share that enthusiasm with James. I can share the wisdom that Michael and Randy bring to the company and the product. And I feel like I can live in the quantum state, multiple states at the same time, right? Not 1 and 0. So, but what I can bring to the table is this. So after 20 years with IBM, Accenture, Ernst & Young, Grab, I bring a wealth of network, not only in Vietnam, but the people across the world, in both in the investment side and also in consulting side. But the consulting mindset is we also always put our position in the position of the customers. And who are my customer? The banks, right? The insurance company, the government, the defense companies, the infrastructure companies. So I know what they want. They might not want a Mercedes. We try to sell Mercedes to them. They might need only the Toyota, right? So right now we have something better than Toyota, almost like a Mercedes, but very affordable. Like Michael and James said, it runs on the current infrastructure. No need to invest more current infrastructure, right? So that's the elegance of the technology that Michael and James and Randy is bringing to the market.
Yeah.
Is that enough, Rossi?
Indeed. I was going to ask you, why do you believe in Quantropi technology? But I think you already answered that.
Because I was leading the cybersecurity for Ernst & Young in Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. So I got a little bit of exposure to cybersecurity. But I think the years in consulting give you the opportunity to smell the opportunity, right? I know this is going to be big in the future, because I know the need of the customer, I know the needs of the banks, the government, right? So I know where the money is coming from, right, James? So
it's coming from you. It's coming from that. That's where it came from.
as soon as I talked to James, actually, when I first talked to James, more about opportunity to collaborate. But I listened to James after 10 minutes. I said, James, can I please make an investment? And that's the beginning of our journey.
Nice. So maybe because today we are, of course, with a lot of talent and students who's, I guess, very invested in this field, very new field for our countries, let's say. So if you have to give them an advice, let's say recommendations, given the career path or the research path, or also to see what this technology can play a role within our local economy.
You're asking me? Okay.
Yeah, I want to ask you.
Okay, so I remember about 10 years ago, at a time after I left Accenture and I joined IBM, I had a chance to talk to the CTO of IBM Global. And I asked the same question. Said, what should I do? I'm a young person, not relatively young person in the consulting. What should I do? And he said this, and I still remember today, is that you should, and I talked to my son 2 days ago, I said the same thing. I said, you should build your career like a T. like a T, right? So at the beginning, you have to build your expertise, dig really deep, brand yourself as expert in that area, because that's how people get to know you. Just like James said, brand yourself. You got to be Rossi quantum something, right? Or you got to be like, you got to be known as an expertise in some field, and it takes years to build that kind of expertise. You got to volunteer yourself, get involved in this society, that club, write something, help something, right? So brand yourself, do a little bit of self-promotion, a little bit of PR. It's not shameful. It's required now to do that, right? Be visible on LinkedIn. And once you have about 10, 15 years, and then you should brand yourself out, build yourself like a T, right? I got to do more marketing, a little bit more about management, a little bit more about sales, leading teams. So you balance your skill like a T. It takes time, but it's up to you to find out opportunities to build that kind of skill set. Would you agree, Michael? Is that something that you would agree to?
Yeah, no, I 100%. And I would even add, to build on that, as you're becoming, famous for something, like we used to talk about that, build that reputation, and more, it's about less, again, like you said, I think very nicely, it's not about, shameless self-promotion so much as working hard and creating authority and passion and communicating. Don't, because something, sharing it with others then makes you, and helping others makes you the go-to resource. And so you build that reputation. But what's very important, especially like say with a country with Vietnam, the risk for some, especially for technical folks, is they think they have to build everything. They think they have to do it all themselves. And if you can understand quantum technology and be the bridge, whether it's invented in your local market in Vietnam, or comes from France, or comes from the US, or comes from China, or comes from wherever in the world, if you can be the bridge maker that understands it and can do that connection between what it can do and why a local company would care, then suddenly you're creating this invaluable service. And I will tell you, having worked with many countries and many cities and many entrepreneurs and many technologists around the world, local executives love to buy local. They love to support their local economy. They want to put their money to work with local technology, local startups, local experts, because they know that's good citizenship to put money to work, but they'll give it to a foreign entity if there's nobody local that they can spend it with. And so therefore it's be the local, agent of a global technology base and build that depth, like Dad said, and then spread yourself out. Man, you're in a wonderful position to really do something special in your home market because of the knowledge you're gaining of a very important technology space.
And Rossi, can I add one more thing before we take off? I remember when I first came to Asia about 10 years ago, and I went to a meeting with Accenture in Singapore. And the lady in charge of Accenture ASEAN, she's Lê Lim Theo. She's a very nice lady. So she took me to the afternoon. I didn't have anything to do in Singapore. So she said, come with me. So she drove me to University in Singapore, and there was a class of MBA students. And they asked her this question. They asked her, can you tell me one skill that will help us to become leaders? And she came out with one word, and that is communication skill. And I still remember that's true. And when I look at every candidate that go to interviews with me, or when I talk to, I can detect right away that person can be a leader because of the communication skill. It's not because that you have to be flashy, you have to be wordy, but your words have some credibility and has the power of convincing and persuasion. And James, I'm not buttering you up, but when I talk to you, that's what I see. And that's why I put the money into James right away, because the communication is credible and with passion, not foolish passion like young people in love, but passion and commitment to the work that's being done. So if one word I can part with the PhD, the master students, the people attending today, one more skill is technical skill, business skill, but also communication skill, and you will do well.
That's great. Thank you. And that I'll give my advice is very simple. Just start, right? If you start, everything after that is progress. And the thing is, if you're unsure, search, do market research, find answers as soon as possible. Don't waste time. Time is your biggest asset, right? So the sooner you make the best of your time, the sooner you get to better results. I have to tell you from my experience is the most important thing is, besides finding the right co-founder, a strong investor, is making sure you have support of your family and your partners. A lot of people don't talk about this, but if you go into starting something big without the support of your wife or your husband or your family, it's going to be 1,000 times harder, right? And the thing is, you have to understand the statistics is 99% of startups fail. So if you don't have that, it's pretty much like 99.999% you're going to fail, right? So it's so that's my recommendation. And then, like I said, communication is key. And I have to tell you, with my brand is they call me like kind of Batman or the money man or the rainmaker, because it's I made known that I'm the investment guy, I'm the money guy, or and I had to learn like 4 or 5 different languages. Why? Because I knew China was a big market back then, so I learned Chinese. I wanted to get into Vietnam, and then also do kind of manufacturing. But the thing is, also understand your weaknesses, right? Like my wife would tell you, everything I touch, I freaking break, So I knew I would never be an inventor, right? So I said, I have to find a guy that's a really good inventor, and basically I'll take it from there. I'll sell it. I'm the sales guy, right? So again, understand your strengths, double down on it, understand your weaknesses, find someone to fill the gap. That's pretty much my advice.
No, I think it's so valuable to hear also, because you are in the field, you have experience, right? And also our students here are now very, very early in their career in quantum field. So to hear that, be a local agent of a global technologies, have that skill set of communications, have that support of your family, understand your strength and weakness. I think these are the valuable lessons that we'll take away from today. I'm very sad, but we are over time a bit, and I know that you probably have meetings and other students probably have another course. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I believe that if we don't have a chance to ask you all the questions, I would encourage a student to send it to us. I will pass on to James, Michael, and Dad. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that we can see you in the next time in a different event. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rossi.
Bye, Rossi.